Yo. In this video I'm going to show you a couple things that you can do to make your playing more dynamic. Now, I'm going to be demonstrating a bunch of different subtle techniques with a chord progression that I'm going to be playing over and over again. And the first thing that I want to do is teach you that chord progression so you can play along. So, the chords are A minor, C, and F, and I'm playing them in spread triads. So only 3 notes. And I'm going to be picking them, finger picking them with this claw. 1, 2, 3. Just these 3 fingers. So our first chord is A minor. I've got my ring finger on the 5th fret of the E string. There's the note A. I've got my first finger on the 2nd fret of the D string. There's the note E. And then my pinky is on the 5th fret of the G string. There's the note C. This is a 1, 5, 3 A minor spread triad. Now, we're going to go to a C major second inversion chord. All we actually have to do to make that chord change is take the 5th fret on the E string and make it the 3rd fret on the E string by dropping our 2nd finger there, and we keep our first finger and our pinky in the exact same spot. A minor to C major. Then we're going to go to F major. I've got my first finger on the 1st fret of the E string, there's F. I've got my ring finger on the 3rd fret of the A string, there's C. And my 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, there's A. So this is a 1, 5, 3 F spread triad. And again, I'm picking these with this claw. So my thumb is always on the E string, my first finger is playing the A string and the D string, and my 2nd finger is playing the G string. And I'm going to play the chords with this rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's talk about dynamics. Now, what are dynamics? Playing dynamically is playing quietly sometimes and loudly sometimes, and there's a nice balance between the two. The quiet parts are building up to the loud parts, and the loud parts are setting us up for sort of a gentle fall back into the quiet parts. There's like an interplay between loud parts and quiet parts, instead of, you know, music that's just the exact same intensity all the way across. That would eventually get kind of boring. And, you know, it would sound like this. If I was going to strike each note with the exact same intensity, it would sound something like this. It's not bad, but it might get boring after a while. It's not super interesting. It doesn't sound bad, but it could be better. That's what I'll say. It could be better. Now, I want us to hone in on our claw, what we're doing with our right hand. So, what I was just doing was striking the strings and letting them ring out. I wasn't doing anything with my hand after I was striking the strings until I was striking the strings again. Now, an easy thing that we can do to get sort of more control over the notes that we're ringing out is just to put our fingers back down on the strings after we strike. Like that. And mute them. Especially for this chord progression, playing these notes like staccato or short it's gonna sound a little bit better because we have this rhythmic bump, 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 bump. So listen to the difference between these two things. Again, maybe it's not better, it's different. You know, this is just a tool that you could use if you wanted to go for a particular sound. So, in my opinion, I like to do these. I like to just rest my fingers back down on the strings after I pluck them, just to create a little bit more emphasis on the notes. Okay, the second thing that we can do is strike the notes harder or softer. Now, that's really as simple as it sounds. I'm going to be just plucking with more force. So there's emphasis on some notes. So there, I'm emphasizing the first note of each chord. And then I'm backing off. Then I'm playing the notes that follow that kind of quietly. You could emphasize different notes in the progression for different effect. There's the last note of every chord. Okay, so right off the bat, we've talked about two ways that you can add sort of more control with your right hand. You can put your fingers back down on the strings after you pluck, before you pluck again, to mute them, and you can strike harder and softer to create emphasis on certain notes. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a really, really important tool, and it's called palm muting. You're probably familiar with it, or have at least heard it. Maybe if you're not sure how to do it, you've definitely heard it before. Tons of guitar players use it. It's super important in my guitar playing. It's a huge part of it. And basically what we're doing is we're taking this part of our hand and we're resting it actually on the strings. Now, normally when I'm finger picking, when I'm doing my claw thing, I like to have my palm resting directly on top of the bridge so that it's not on the strings, but it's not behind them at all. It's just straight up on top of like the saddle pieces or whatever. So when my palm is right here, it's not really muting the strings. If there's any muting going on, I'm really relying on the tips of my fingers to come back down and mute the strings. But all I have to do to start palm muting is shift my hand a little bit onto the strings. Now, there's a sweet spot for every guitar. On mine, it's like in between this edge of the pickup and the bridge. So half inch, maybe a half inch is where I'm sliding my hand up. You really don't want to put your hand too far to where you're actually stopping the strings from ringing out. You want them to ring out. You just want them to be dampened a little bit. Teeny, tiny little bit. So the difference between palm muting and not palm muting sounds like this. So you can hear it's a pretty stark difference. On one hand, these notes are ringing out. When we palm mute them, they're quite dull, they're quite dampened. This can be a really useful tool because it's a way to create a completely different sound. If you combine all of these things together, so muting after we strike the strings with the tips of our fingers, striking harder or softer, and palm muting, we can create a piece of music that sounds like it has way more going on than if we didn't use any of those. So check the difference between the way that I play this. So here's with not really any dynamics. Again, it doesn't really sound bad, but there's nothing special to it. Now check this. So it had way more character, emotion to it, all because of little tiny things I was doing with my right hand. If you're a pick player, obviously you're not going to be able to do some of these things as well. You definitely can still palm mute. That's probably going to be your bread and butter. If you're trying to play chords with a pick, palm muting is going to be your best tool for creating dynamics. So it's not really yes or no thing, like yeah, you should always palm mute, or no, you shouldn't palm mute. You should dial it in on various degrees depending on what sort of emotion you want the listener to feel. If you want your music to sound kind of subdued, or let's say even within a chord progression, you want the beginning of the chord progression to sound a little quiet and backed off, and then you want it to build up into open chords, you could start palm muting heavily and then pull it back by the end of the chord progression. So like There we go. I dialed it back, so I started, palm muting quite intensely, and then the second chord it was a little bit less, and by the third chord I'm fully backed off. Now, all I'm really doing is just sliding my hand up and down, a half inch or so. Here I'm resting on the bridge, here I'm resting on the actual strings. Here I'm on the bridge, here I'm on the strings. You can see I'm actually just moving my hand up and down. Okay, so those three things: muting the strings with your fingers after you've plucked them, striking harder and softer, and palm muting will take your fingerstyle guitar to the next level. Now, there's another thing that I want to show you, just another technique that I love and I use all the time that I think is pretty useful, and it can also be accomplished with the claw, so it's somewhat related, and that is rolling chords instead of striking them at once. So instead of this, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. That's all at once. I'm rolling the chord off. Bum, bum, bum. Now, this can be a really interesting way to turn a chord progression into more of like a lick or a riff. It's not just striking chords. It's almost got like melody in it. There's the exact same chord progression with the chords rolled instead of struck. So try that out. Try rolling a chord off, and you can do this with way more than just these chords. Any chord that you can try rolling it instead of striking it all at once for a little bit of like a crossover between rhythm and melody. Okay, here's the kicker. This chord progression that I just taught you, that's a John Mayer song called I Don't Trust Myself with Loving You, and that's in the same key that the studio cut is, so you can go and jam along with that song now. It's on the album Continuum. I usually pull up a YouTube video of it and just play along. You can do that now with these chords. And it's even the same rhythm as the song. It's kind of why I did this. It's an amazing song. It's in the key of C major, A minor, so if you know your scales, you could play the A minor scale, the C major scale, maybe the A minor pentatonic scale, or the C major pentatonic scale. But you can jam over the rhythm now with those chords. And when you do, experiment with these subtle tips and tricks on your right hand. So, plucking harder and soft, muting with the fingertips after you've struck the note, and palm muting. All those things can come together for you to make your playing more dynamic and expressive. That would be a good way to put this. Music without these things is not going to be bad, but you're going to be able to make it more interesting, more expressive, by using these tips and tricks. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot from this, and I will catch you next time. Peace.